What's going on, guys? It's me, Zach, bringing you guys another fantasy football video. In this one, I'm going to go over 5 players I've identified as pretty big busts this season. They're all going in the first 5 rounds of fantasy drafts, and I tried to mix it up among the positions so that they weren't all at the same position. Each of these guys, I think, really has a chance to be quite the sinkhole on your team this season, and I really think that it's going to be best not necessarily avoid them, but just make sure you're being careful and understand the pros and cons of each player. Obviously, if you disagree with me, let me know in the comments. I love getting your feedback. I recently finished up a series where I talked about breakouts at each position. If you haven't watched those videos, I do recommend you go do so. And if you get anything out of them, please give me a like, give me comments if you have any questions. Really helps grow the channel and all that. Same thing for this video. If you get anything out of it, please do drop a like. It really helps a lot. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Really would love to get to 100 subscribers before the start of the season. We're at 78 right now, so I think we can get there, but it's going to take quite a bit of a push over the next month. So let's see if we can make it happen. With that, I'll get started with the first bust. The first player I'm absolutely avoiding him in pretty much all of my drafts. I don't think I've ended up with him anywhere. Is Deebo Samuel, and this has nothing to do with Deebo Samuel the player. I think he's an elite NFL player. I won't call him a receiver or a running back because he's sort of both, but I do know he's certainly elite with the ball in his hands. But I think that there's going to be a very clear decrease in passing volume on the 49ers offense, moving from Jimmy Garoppolo to Trey Lance. It's pretty obvious that they're going to look to run the ball more, even not only with the running backs, but they're going to look to run the ball more with Lance as well. And he himself has said he wants to be utilized less as a runner, which makes a lot of sense. He wants to prolong his career, and runners, especially running backs, tend to get banged up quicker. But unfortunately, that's where a lot of his value came from in fantasy, was the fact that he had about 60 rushing attempts on the ground and put together 8 rushing touchdowns. And I just don't see him doing that again this year. Not to mention Ayuk and Trey Lance have been working together this offseason, so I think they've got pretty strong chemistry. So I think that there might be less of a drop off between Deebo and Ayuk and Kittle in terms of target share. So I think you're going to see Deebo get a lower percentage of targets from an already smaller pie, and he's going to get a lot less work on the ground. He's still going to get used there because of how elite he is, but I think they're going to try and do more so getting him the ball in his hands through end arounds and that much. They're not really going to use him on the ground as a running back as much, I don't believe. That's going to result in some touchdown regression. He scored 14 touchdowns last season, and I would expect him to end up under 10 total touchdowns this season. He's currently being drafted at around the 16th pick as the wide receiver 6 off the board, and I have him outside of my top 15 at the position. I think I have him around my wide receiver 18. So that's not to say that Deebo is going to be bad this year. I think he's going to put up some really spike weeks. He's going to have some explosive plays, and he's going to be a really talented NFL player, but I think he's going to be really hard to trust given the low volume, and you're pretty much going to need a touchdown out of him every week for him to be an elite receiver, and I don't see that happening. The next player I have projected as a bust this season is Cam Akers. Obviously, he returned last season during the Rams playoff stretch, but he was absolutely brutal in that playoff stretch. He averaged 2.6 yards per carry and almost gave the game away to the Buccaneers. He had 2 fumbles in that game. So that alone sort of scared me off of him from the beginning, just seeing how truly ineffective he looked on the ground. It is worth noting that despite how bad he was, they did continue to give him the lion's share of the carries out of that backfield. So I think that's why he's being drafted as high as he is because people are banking on him returning to health and then being the explosive player he was his rookie year and then getting the volume in a really high-powered offense in LA. But there's really not a history of players returning from Achilles injuries in the NFL and being anywhere near the player they have been. And for me, I think that's just something that I don't want to take the risk on happening until I've seen it happen before. And he's being drafted super high to the point where you're really gambling pretty hard on Cam Akers being a staple in your fantasy lineup every single week. He's being drafted in the mid-3rd round, so he's probably being drafted as your RB2. And he's being drafted ahead of guys like James Conner, Ezekiel Elliott, Antonio Gibson, Josh Jacobs. Guys who I think are far safer in that I don't expect them to. There's not really a risk of them just being absolutely washed. Cam Akers, there is a non-zero chance that he comes out of the gate this season and just sucks. And they have to go back to Darrell Henderson. There's also obviously the risk of him re-injuring himself. That's just a lot more risk than I want to put into a player that I'm absolutely counting on. There's the saying that you can't necessarily win your league early in your drafts, but you can lose it. And I think that Cam Akers is one of those players that could lose your leagues early on. So for me, I'm just avoiding him, mainly out of injury fear. I absolutely could be wrong on this, but I just don't think there's any way he finishes the season near his ADP. He's either going to be way above it or way below it, and I'm sort of expecting him to finish way below it. Next player I'm pretty much avoiding in all of my drafts as well is A.J. Brown. Again, I do love A.J. Brown, the player. I think he's an elite wide receiver. But I think that this is going to be a pretty low passing volume offense in Philadelphia. Philadelphia is going to look to run the ball with Miles Sanders, and then Jalen Hurts is going to run the ball quite a bit himself. Um, so I think that's going to limit A.J. Brown's upside. I get it. He's always been in a pretty low passing volume offense, and he's managed to be extremely efficient, and that's how he's overcame that. But on top of the low volume, I think he's likely to start the season slow. He's on a new team. He'll be gaining familiarity with the system. So I think that you might even see a few weeks to start the year where Devonta Smith is sort of the number one. And let's not forget Devonta Smith was drafted in the first round. He actually put together quality rookie seasons. There's not even a guarantee that A.J. Brown is the wide receiver one on this offense. Obviously, he's got the injury history, so I think it's pretty safe to say that A.J. Brown will miss a few games this season. And he's going to need double-digit receiving touchdowns to pay off his draft capital, and I just don't see Jalen Hurts throwing many more than 20 touchdowns this season. Hurts might rush for 10 and throw for 20, but obviously A.J. Brown's not going to get any of the 10 that Hurts rushes for, so I think it's going to be really hard for him to see that number. He's being drafted as the wide receiver 11, ahead of guys I like a lot, like Michael Pittman, Mike Williams, T. Higgins. All those guys I have ranked ahead of him. I do have him ranked as my wide receiver 17, so maybe saying A.J. Brown I project to be a bust is a little harsh, but I think that he's going to be really inconsistent throughout the season. He'll have those spike weeks, and I think he's much more of a best ball asset than a redraft asset. I think you're going to have a lot of frustrating weeks, but you're going to have to put him in your lineup every single week, and I think it's really going to be hard to know which of those weeks A.J. Brown's going to perform for you, so I'm just, in general, avoiding him, especially at his ADP. The fourth player that I'm pretty much out on this season is Deontay Johnson. He benefited from 10 targets a game last season, just about. He finished the season with 169 targets. And that alone I don't see nearly being replicable for him this season. I think that Big Ben certainly got the ball and threw it to the guy he knew would be open right away, which is Deontay. And I'm not trying to take anything away from Deontay Johnson. He's an extremely talented receiver. He's a great route runner, and he's got great hands. But there are going to be far less plays this season where the ball is snapped directly to the quarterback and then thrown to the receiver. So you're going to see the volume of Deontay go down a lot, and I don't think he's got nearly enough field stretching ability, especially with Claypool and Pickens there, to really be a very explosive player, a very efficient player. On top of that, he's dealing with a contract dispute. The Steelers seem to be pretty adamant about not wanting to pay him the $20 million a year he looks like he wants. So he's going to miss time in training camp, and that's going to mean he's going to struggle to gain chemistry with Pickett or Trubisky. And that's another reason he's going to have a hard time getting those targets. And in addition, it's just going to be a lower passing volume offense. I think that more and more the Steelers are going to look to win football games by running the ball and playing good defense. And the quarterbacks are going to be more mobile, so that in itself is going to take away passing volume. So there's just going to be a lot less opportunity to go around for Deontay Johnson. And he just screams to me that he's going to be this year's Allen Robinson. He's a really talented route runner with great hands, gets open all the time, but he's got a new quarterback, a new young quarterback, and he's sort of viewed as one of those can't go wrong players because of how much volume he gets. People are expecting him to be just a low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2, but I think that a world exists where he's just not usable, or there's a world that exists where not a single Steeler receiver is usable this season just because of how many targets there are between Deontay, Claypool, Pickens, Najee, Freiermuth. It's going to be really hard for a pretty low-octane offense to support 5 weapons like that, so I think it's going to be really hard to trust Deontay at any point this season. Lastly, I wanted to throw a quarterback on this list, and the quarterback that to me seems to be drafted far higher than their floor and certainly pretty much at their ceiling to me this season is Joe Burrow. The main reason there is that he just doesn't offer any rushing upside, so it's going to be really difficult for him to find his way into the top 5 at the position because that's going to be a position that is dominated by the players who not only replicate what Burrow is going to offer you through the air, but are going to add that rushing floor. Even last season, which I think most would argue was an extremely efficient season for Burrow, he finishes the QB 10 in fantasy points per game. And he's currently being drafted with an ADP of quarterback 6, and he's going ahead of guys like Lamar Jackson, Russell Wilson, Jalen Hurts, and all three of those guys have way more upside than he does. So really it seems to me like his ceiling is sort of giving you a Matthew Stafford season like Stafford gave you last year, and he finishes the QB 6. So basically Burrow's going to need to throw for 5,000 yards and 40 touchdowns to pay off this season. And that basically make him an MVP candidate. So basically what you're looking at is you need Burrow to be an MVP candidate to finish as the quarterback 6, as to where a guy like Jalen Hurts or Trey Lance or Russell Wilson or Lamar Jackson can put up 4,000 yards and 30 touchdowns, but they're going to offer you several hundred rushing yards and a few rushing touchdowns that Burrow's not going to give you, and they can do the same thing. So Burrow's just got a far lower ceiling, and I think that especially as long as Zach Taylor's the head coach there, they definitely want to run the ball with Mixon. They invested pretty heavily in their offensive line this season, so I don't see that changing at all. So I think that really that you're not going to get a Bengals offense that airs it out enough for Burrow to find his way into the top 5 at the position like you've seen with Brady over the past couple of years. And basically you're drafting Burrow at his ceiling right now, and there's a lot of players going around Burrow that I'd prefer to draft and then wait later on a different quarterback. Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, check out these other videos here if you haven't. If you want more content, please feel free to follow me on Twitter at RealSteelFFB. I'll be more active on there as the season goes on. Thanks. Catch you later.